As a habit enthusiast, I've read a lot of self-help books about forming habits. However, this time I decided to read a couple of scientific articles. When I searched online for a good scientific article to read, I stumbled upon this review article, which basically coalesces a bunch of other scientific studies and summarizes it in a concise, annotated form. So today I'll go over a few of the conclusions that I've gathered from reading this science paper and that I've already used to help build up my habits. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I'm Keith, and I recently graduated from high school, and I'll be attending Princeton University in the fall. Most of us already know how habits form, and usually that's through a cue, and then you have a craving for it, then you carry out the action, and then you get a reward for it. And this is a cycle that usually gets stronger and stronger the more times you repeat it. I want to go over a few more specifics that are covered in this paper. The first insight is the expanded flowchart of habit formation. The second insight is how decision making reduces habit formation. The third insight is the truth about getting rid of old habits and forming new ones. And the fourth one is the best piece of habit advice that I found from this paper. So the first thing I want to talk about is the expanded flowchart of habit formation. So one of the first things that the paper talks about is this flowchart for understanding habits. Now, one of the first things I notice is that instead of the craving that we get after we have a particular context cue, we instead have a mental representation of the habitual action. And after thinking about it for a while, I realized that describing the craving as a mental representation of the habitual response is actually a better way of describing it, since we know from experimental research that once you have a particular cue that triggers the craving, you already begin to think about the action that you're going to do. So after clarifying what craving actually means in a more specific manner, the paper also mentions how the goal system interacts with the habits that you form. Now, if we look at the blue parts of this flowchart, we see how the goal system affects the context cue and also activates or inhibits the habitual response. So if my goal system is to have good hygiene, I make this goal within the context of my bedroom and bathroom. So basically my goal system will make sure that I brush my teeth and shower and make sure that I smell good. And this is basically how the goal system interacts with your habitual response. Even though this flowchart does have some obvious components to it, the reason why I included it in this video is because it's really helpful to see habit formation in terms of a flowchart. This way I can isolate certain parts of my behavior whenever I want to troubleshoot a bad habit or whenever I want to change something. So the second insight is how decision making can hinder habit formation. And the punchline is that planning and making deliberate choices when responding to a context cue can actually hinder habit formation. And when I first read that sentence in the paper, I couldn't believe it. How can making decisions in the moment and forcing yourself to do something by making choices and planning it out actually hinder your habit formation? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this actually makes a lot of sense. One of the first things that came up into my mind was that habits are meant to be automatic. So if you're accessing a part of your brain that is meant for deliberate planning and deliberate decision making, you're probably not doing that thing automatically, and instead you're relying on either your willpower, your goal system to motivate you to do the action, or so forth. Say for example that you have a math worksheet due every day. The context cue will probably be that you're in your room after school and you remember that you have to do some math. If you have to deliberately plan and make decisions about what aspect of the worksheet you're going to do in that moment, it's probably not going to be a habit. It's just going to be an event that you force yourself to do in the moment. So as you can see, making decisions in the moment isn't really conducive to habit formation. And after this realization, I use this information to remind myself that if I want to form a habit, I need to have a very specific action plan in place whenever I'm struck with the context cue. The third insight I want to talk about is the truth behind getting rid of old habits and forming new habits. The paper makes a point that you can never fully override or get rid of bad habits. and that you can only suppress or inhibit them through your intentional planning or deliberate action. And despite that, the paper does mention how changes in location or just life transitions in general can alter locational habit cues and provide opportunities for new habit formation without having to deal or compete with old habits. So basically, what I derive from all of these points is that the best way to get rid of your old habits is by replacing them with new ones. Instead of telling yourself or forcing yourself to stop eating dessert after a meal, you can instead replace that old unwanted habit with a new, healthier one, which is eating an apple. And I'm going to emphasize this again because I think it's so important. If you want to stop an unwanted habit, replace it with a new desired one. And we often fall into this mental trap of thinking that the only thing we need to do to get rid of an unwanted habit is to stop doing the habit. Say if we're addicted to our phones, all we have to do is just stop using our phone. If we're addicted to smoking, we just have to stop smoking. But there's often a second layer to this, and that's replacing that old habit with a new one. And this increases the chances that we don't relapse because we're kind of overriding the old habit with a new one. We're forming new pathways so that we don't relapse whenever we're hit with the context cue that was associated with the old habit. And for me personally, I'm trying to implement this insight into my finger biting habit. So whenever I get stressed, usually around exams in school, I tend to start biting my fingers a lot. And obviously this is a habit that I want to avoid. I'm trying to replace this habit with a fidgeting tool like blue tack or something to keep my fingers busy. The fourth and final insight that I want to talk about is the best habit advice I've gotten from this paper. And in the end, the best way to strengthen your habits is to 1, have a set routine that doesn't change, and 2, have a particular location where this triggers the habitual response. And these two things are basically the fundamentals, the only thing you really need to know when you're forming a habit. The thing that I find really tricky is number 2, having a particular location. And for some habits, it may be easier than others. If we're talking about brushing your teeth, it's really easy to have a particular location. It's in the morning and you're in the bathroom. And basically you can apply this framework to any and all habits that you want to build. It definitely does take a bit of trial and error at the beginning of forming a habit to have a good routine and to have a particular location to cue that routine. So it shouldn't be surprising if you get annoyed or it's really difficult to start at the beginning. Alright, so that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed my analysis and my opinions on this scientific review paper. And if you're trying to build good habits in preparation for school, college, I wish you the best of luck. And if you found it helpful, please consider subscribing or liking down below.